I'd like to begin by acknowledging there we go, meeting's being recorded. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands that we live and learn and pay respects to elders past, present and emerging. We are very excited to welcome Shane Pearson to present tonight at Read Ballarat. The topic is, can we improve reading comprehension in a hurry? Making a short-term primary school reading comprehension intervention. Shane is a speech pathologist, speech and language pathologist who's led Brandon Park Primary School's whole school literacy program and literacy intervention team for the past few years, and is currently on secondment in the Department of Ed, working with the Phonics Plus lesson plans unit. Shane has a specialty in speech language pathology in the field of language and literacy, including dyslexia, oral and written language difficulties. And Shane's contributions and commitment to free instructional materials for teachers is astounding. This includes being the lead author of PhOrMeS, which is a free word reading and spelling curriculum, and Read to Learn, which provides resources for developing a knowledge-rich curriculum. Shane's going to talk about his work at Brandon Park Primary School's small literacy intervention team. And specifically, that is around short-term reading comprehension and how do we do it in a short time frame. Thank you so much, Shane.
Fantastic. Can you hear me okay, Kate? Great, thank you. Thank you very much for that welcome. And yeah, I am in the central office at the moment on secondment with the Phonics Plus team, which is fantastic. And I will obviously not be talking about that today. We're talking about something that is from Brandon Park Primary, which is my substantive school. So without further ado, I'll just make sure I'm giving you all the right screen here. And, excuse me, we shall make a start. I'm on the back end of this presentation here. The start would probably be better. Okay, so what I am here to talk to you about today is, as Kate mentioned, trying to improve reading comprehension in a hurry. Now, we will talk obviously more about sort of, I guess, why we wanted to try to attempt to do that. It's a very tall order. Now, I'll be presenting this today, but realistically, I'm only half of this, or maybe even more like 1/5 of it. Talika on the left-hand side here, who's an integration aid and literacy intervention leader at Brandon Park Primary, in my absence there. She and I guess, are the masterminds behind what we tried to do, and Talika is actually the person that's done the majority of the work with kids at our school with this program. So she deserves a lot of credit, but she's far too humble to take a lot of it. She will be here, and I'll try and get her to say good day at some point to give us a bit of information from her perspective as well. Probably a quick disclaimer, because I am on secondment, working 4 days a week for Central Department of Education, that what I talk about today, it's got really nothing to do with Phonics Plus or anything to do with the department's position on anything. It's purely just our work at Brandon Park. So just to make that clear for everyone. Okay, so let's make a start. And before we start, I want to introduce you to these three really interesting texts. So obviously we've got two texts on the left, so two sort of relatively short books, and also one journal article that I read quite some time ago, and that I feel is really a rather important one to share with you before we sort of talk about today. So this book on the left, Understanding and Teaching Reading Comprehension, it's a really, I guess, fairly boring type title there, but it tells you exactly what it tries to do, and it's an outstanding book. It's possibly one of the best books I think I've read on education, and I'm quite a nerd, but I would say probably just one of the best books I've read, full stop. So easy to read, and clarified so much for me around reading comprehension and sort of how it differs from oral comprehension. So coming from the world of speech path, where we did a lot of work at university on understanding oral language development, which puts you in good stead to understand reading comprehension. They are different beasts, while related, and that book does a really good job of explaining all the things that need to go into a child understanding what they read really well. The second book, which is one that tends to be one that more people know about, called Questioning the Author. So it's really good in that we've sometimes had I'll talk about this more, we've sometimes had a little bit of a tension sometimes between reading comprehension strategies, how much time we should spend on them, are they even effective, that sort of thing. And this book goes in a little bit of a different direction, where it's I don't want to misbrand it quickly by saying it quickly, but it really talks about how we need to make the text central when we're trying to work on comprehension. So it's not about the strategy that we're using; it's about trying to understand the text. So pairing that with the book on the left, really, really helpful. And then this article by Daniel Willingham just talks about what the evidence base for reading comprehension strategies is. It's probably now a little out of date. There may well be far better articles that have come out since, but it talks about the fact that a lot of these strategies are actually really effective, but it's a matter of sort of how much we need to do, and how much instruction on strategies is beneficial, and also when. So this sort of idea that we need to make sure that our kids actually can read relatively fluently before we put on a ton of metacognitive type strategies, because we know how much load is put onto kids when they're learning how to read. So it's about sort of positioning really effective use of comprehension strategies, but time and place, essentially. So I drew a lot on this when Talika and I began writing this short program that we implemented at Brandon Park. And around about the time that we were doing this, this fantastic podcast episode from Nate Joseph. Actually, well, that's not from Nate Joseph. He had a panel with these 5 really amazing individuals talking about reading comprehension. And the thing that heartened me is that a lot of the things that we were trying to do with this short-term comprehension intervention were things that they were discussing in this podcast, which was really nice. I was actually quite nervous listening to it at the time, hoping that what we were trying to do was similar. So a really great, a lot of Nate Joseph's roundtables are really good, and this one's particularly good. Now, I'd probably go further as well and talk about the fact that phonics instruction, we know is critically important for teaching kids how to read, and it also is critically important for later reading comprehension development. But it's also something that's probably easier to implement at a sort of whole school level and in intervention. You can sort of see that it's working when you're doing it. Comprehension teaching, comprehension work in interventions, a lot hairier, a bit trickier to work out what sort of progress you're making it, etc. So it's always been something that's been a little more elusive for us at Brandon Park in the intervention space. So that's why we began sort of the quest to think about how to do this well with our kids. So that gives you sort of a ballpark of what information, the information diet for thinking about reading comprehension might be. If you haven't had a look at those couple of books, really good. Obviously, there's a range of other ones as well that I'll talk about right at the end of today. The other thing I want to talk about before we go into massive depth about what the program is, got to understand where a comprehension intervention might fit within a whole school's intervention program for literacy. So just to give you a couple of stats, currently at Brandon Park, we have about 2.5 EFT in the intervention space, and there's about 600 kids at the school, or just under. Obviously, with good quality tier 1 teaching, we want to try and reduce the number of kids that are in intervention. But yeah, 2.5 EFT, even then, to make sure that we do good quality intervention is, yeah, it poses a challenge. It's tricky. And we've had the key here is had quite a fluctuating EFT in intervention, as high as close to sort of 4, and then back down to maybe 1.5 or so. So that also poses challenges as well. What we like to try and do, and I think this sort of is one of the key things that must happen in intervention, is we try to see kids a minimum of 2 sessions a week. But somewhere between 2 and 4, and even 5 if we've got a child that's particularly tricky to work with, as in tricky to work with because their difficulties in learning to read and spell, etc., are difficult. We might try and see them 5 times a week. So we're not necessarily just trying to see every single kid who we think might need intervention. We're saying we've got a certain number of hours that we can provide, and for it to be effective, we're going to make sure that we give them enough sessions in a week. So that we can get that effectiveness going. We will go somewhere between in that sort of response to intervention model. So having groups up to 4, sometimes even 5, for kids who might come in, and we would be saying that they're working at sort of that tier 2 level, so they're in a small group intervention because they need more than what's in classroom, but they don't necessarily need to be one-on-one just yet, all the way through to kids who are one-on-one. And those are the kinds of kids, or 1 to 2, those are the sorts of kids who eventually are going to end up in that tier 3 kind of risk support, who need really, really intensive support for possibly quite a while. And this is a really big one. When we first started at Brandon Park, we didn't really know which kids to take for intervention. It was a little bit hit and miss. And a lot of it actually did rely on teacher judgment. Now what we try to do as much as possible is take our assessment data. So Brandon Park, a lot of the schools, will use Dibbles or something like that as a screener, and then a couple of other assessments to assist with reading and writing assessment. Brandon Park has been using something called Easy CBM, which is very similar to Dibbles for quite a while. And so we try and take our children's assessment data from that to show us who should be getting intervention and who maybe might be on the borderline and who really doesn't need intervention because they're going really well. So trying to assign that risk even as far back as before prep. So doing some pre-prep assessments and trying to work out, okay, who are the kids we think might have trouble when they arrive in prep, and then all the way through to year 6. Now, this is all well and good, but sometimes we don't have enough EFT to go around for every single kid we would like to see. So then we have to think economically about this and say, okay, what are our priorities? So even though today we're talking about, okay, yeah, we've tried to make this comprehension program, that's all well and good, but you need to make sure that you've got priorities in any intervention program that you're running to school, so that you're getting your biggest bang for your buck. And the way that we've tried to do that is by prioritizing in this manner. So number 1, and this is what we did day 1 when we started doing intervention all the way back in 2019. If a child is having trouble decoding, that's our biggest priority. because we know that if a child is struggling with decoding, they're not going to be able to read fluently, accurately or fluently. And that's going to be a massive issue for now and for later with their reading development, but every other part of the curriculum. So that's priority number one. So if we had fewer and fewer and fewer hours to provide for intervention, those are the kids that we would still be trying to see. Next up after those, fluency, knowing how key fluency is to reading comprehension. So if we've got kids who have fluency difficulties, and they also on top of that have reading comprehension difficulties, that reading comprehension difficulty could be because of fluency. So this is the other thing to think about this. If we're saying we want to try and work on comprehension for a child, we have to make sure that there are a fair few ingredients in the mix for this kid, that a fair few things that are going well for that kid, for that child, including can they decode really accurately, and then also on top of that, are they actually reading fluently enough? Because if you don't have those two things, and you need to be very fine-grained in your intervention approach, you have to make sure that they've actually got the skills to support reading comprehension. And if they don't, you need to work on those skills. You can do them at the same time, and there have been some kids who've done that with that Brandon Park. But again, it comes down to how many hours do you have, and what's going to make you the biggest bang for your buck at that given point. So after fluency, we actually will then prioritise spelling. The kids that have poor spelling, because we know how important spelling is for the sake of spelling, but then also for written expression. If a child is poor at spelling, chances are it's going to be affecting their writing at some point. So we make that a big priority. So you can sort of see that we're supposed to be talking about reading comprehension. Haven't got there yet, right? Because we see these things not as more important than reading comprehension, but as things that are going to provide building blocks to comprehension. So after that, we finally arrived at reading comprehension. Right? So priority number 4, critically important for so many things, but just again, can't emphasize enough that if you've got troubles in those first 3, especially those first 2, reading comprehension is going to be difficult, by design. So that's why it's not necessarily the biggest priority with the time that we have in our intervention program. Now, I'll put writing in grey because we do some writing intervention, but it's where we start to run out of hours to provide kids with intervention. So there have been some intervention stuff we've done for writing, but it's been more a luxury when we've had more time to do it. Now, the other things to think about here is, again, if we are running out of hours and we have to make some calls about who's going to get intervention and who's not, and this is on the on the back end. So if we've got a child in grade 6 who can't decode, they're going to be they're going to be a very high priority. But at the margins, then we sometimes need to make some decisions because of the environment. We don't have intervention is not something that's got an endless supply. So one of the key things is we go, okay, we're going to prioritise younger over older, knowing that it's going to be faster to help them, and then we can get to some of those older ones potentially. But if we work with those older kids, likelihood is that's going to be slower and we won't get to the younger kids. So that's one reason for doing it. It's also just, again, these are at the margins. These aren't necessarily the kids who are tier 3 kids. Tier 3 kids who can't decode, they're going to be priority number 1. All right. And the other thing that once we start dropping EFT in intervention, we start thinking about blocks of intervention. So giving kids a block of intervention and then having some time off. So that way we actually cycle through and get to more kids. So that hopefully gives you a bit of an idea as to where we're sort of plotting reading comprehension in the big scheme of what are we doing for intervention at our school. And then the question comes in, well, we're pretty clear with what we do with decoding and fluency and spelling. A lot of that comes down to, at the decoding program, we pretty much use PhOrMeS at Brandon Park, surprise, surprise. And and we do a second hit of it if a child's having decoding issues, same for spelling. If a child's having specific issues with fluency, we might use a direct instruction program like corrective reading that's going to hopefully increase that fluency. But for these kids who have reading comprehension, the question's always been, well, what do we do with them? Because there's potentially multiple things we could try. All right. So that led us to thinking through, okay, before we just go, let's jump in again and try and help kids with reading comprehension troubles, we have to go back and answer this question. So reading comprehension, like what actually is it? So have a read of these as they go up. So first one being this. So you need that. And word recognition timed by all of these things. So it's the net effect, the collection of these things. Okay. So this is quite a similar sort of equation to the simple view of reading, which talks about word recognition and language comprehension. Really good model. But we do know that within that language comprehension part of the simple view of reading, there's more than just, it's not just one thing. Obviously, it's multiple things. And one of the ways I think that is good to think about is these three ideas. So kids need to be good at comprehending language. So they need to have vocabulary knowledge. They need to have good sort of syntax knowledge. They need to know how sentences work, and also need to know how sentences link to one another. Okay. On top of that, they need knowledge. Right. So knowledge and language kind of fit together. If you know things about a particular area, chances are you're also going to know the language around that particular area as well. So we need knowledge in order to help us comprehend text. And we know that if we have more knowledge that we bring to a text, chances are we're going to understand it better than if we don't. Okay. So those two things are really key. But then we've also got this other side, because if we sort of say reading comprehension is really just about language and about knowledge, then we would be falling into a trap of saying, I can't really comprehend anything that I don't already know about. And we know that to be false. We can actually learn through reading. So there's got to be something some things that we can do that are beyond just the language that we know now and the knowledge that we have now. And this isn't all of that, because obviously we know how complex reading comprehension is. But one of the key things here is there's all these strategies that we can use, and not necessarily just talking about individual reading comprehension strategies, but we can use verbal reasoning. We can use particular strategies and be more and more strategic about how we try and comprehend something that's really difficult. And that's going to impact on our overall reading comprehension. So that if you sort of think of it like that, we need our word recognition, and I'll just go back one step. Word recognition, it's not word identification, which is slow and laborious. It's word recognition, how quickly, so that sort of recognition of a word. So being able to see a word and it's there for you, bang, you don't need to necessarily think about it. So that times by those other factors sort of leads into reading comprehension. And again, those things in the black there, the language, the knowledge, the strategic thinking constructs. That book, Understanding and Teaching Reading Comprehension, it's fantastic for explaining those things. So I'll let you have a read of that quote there. So I'm not an academic. I read this, didn't write down the source. I definitely remember it because it was a very, very good quote. It struck me because I thought, I'm a speech pathologist, I should kind of get that. But until it sort of someone makes the link for you, that language, oral language and written language are a very similar beast, and oral language is going to feed into written language. A lot of reading comprehension difficulties do stem from an oral language difficulty. And that would make sense, because look at what's on that left-hand side there in the black: language and knowledge, okay? And it's probably even more difficult for kids that have trouble with processing language and don't know as much. It's probably even harder for them to use strategic sort of thinking as they read. Okay, so we can't undersell how important it is to have a strong oral language basis that is going to lead into our reading comprehension. So we know that's a big part of it. It's not all of it, but it's a big part of it. Okay, and as I said, that book does a great job of breaking all that down, and then at the back end of the book, bringing it all together as well. Okay, so then we had to ask ourselves that question, because we know that we can't, in our intervention, we can't have kids being seen for 4 days a week for 7 years, from foundation all the way through to grade 6, doing reading comprehension. It's not that we can't have it, it's that we would love to be able to do that, but in the environment where you don't have the staff perhaps to make that happen, you say, okay, is there anything we can do to sort of shift the needle quickly? Okay. Now, I've come to the realization that the answer is this. Okay. And further answer is this. Right, so there's not some special reading comprehension lock that if we unlock, bam, kids can now understand what they read. It's not that simple. If we just go back a step and think about all these things that are going to underpin reading comprehension, these are not short-term things. Learning language is probably, you could argue, a lifelong skill. Same for knowledge, and strategic thinking takes a bit of time. So the chances of us improving it in a short term, wholesale improvements are low, but it doesn't mean that we can't improve it a little bit. So that's where we come in here. So we go, okay, maybe we actually can improve it a bit. And there are things we can do to change it a bit. The thing we're probably not going to be able to change quickly in a short-term thing, probably not going to be able to change massive deficits in knowledge, right, in a short term. So we go, okay, if we only have a short-term focus with these kids, we know that we don't have enough time to do everything we'd love to with them in intervention. What can we do? All right. So we'll get to that. First off, need to know, okay, how do we know that kids are having reading comprehension problems? Very, very, very difficult thing to assess. We know that things like oral reading fluency from DIBELS, or passage reading fluency, which is the equivalent from Easy CBM, we know it's a good proxy for reading comprehension, but it's not reading comprehension assessment. It's not assessing reading comprehension. We know that reading comprehension is hard. The assessment is really tricky, but you need something. And at Brandon Park, the whole school assessment stuff here in Easy CBM, yes, that passage reading fluency, we do take it into consideration because we know it's a good proxy, it's a good predictor of comprehension, but also there's a test called proficient reading where kids have to read quite a lengthy text, sometimes upwards of 1,500 words, and then are answering questions about it. And it seems that in our assessment schedule, that if a child has any sort of weakness, perhaps in reading comprehension, that's the test that tends to illuminate it. It's actually quite a difficult test. It's tricky. I've actually sat it myself at the sort of year 6 level, and it really made me think. So those two are the key assessments we'll use, and in particular that proficient reading assessment. And then the other thing is, okay, now after that, now let's get to that teacher opinion. So where I talked about at the start, that was actually where we started at Brandon Park with teacher opinion. Now it's the secondary thing. So we don't discount it. It's important, but we need to make sure that we get that first assessment that is a bit more objective. So we'll ask teachers, okay, how they perform, how are your kids performing in reading sessions, in things like read to learn and other reading sessions we might do, a reading comprehension type of sessions we might do in class. And that allows us to work out, okay, who are the kids who might need some work on reading comprehension, and using those two sort of scores, the passage reading, fluency, and proficient reading, we can tell if a child's having fluency issues from passage reading. And if they're having fluency issues before we get to comprehension, we might have to do a fluency intervention. So realistically, what we're saying, well, I guess I'm saying here is, if you're going to do comprehension type work with a child, we just need to make sure that there genuinely is a probable comprehension issue, and that it's not because of things like reading accuracy, reading fluency difficulties. Okay, so that's a really, really key point. Right. So let's go back to what we were doing. Okay, for reading comprehension difficulties. So when we had the luxury of more staff and we had more time to provide to kids, this is what we did. Okay. So we would sometimes either pre-teach or teach lessons again from things like read to learn that make up a lot of our reading instruction at Brandon Park. And we would, knowing that knowledge building and children understanding language is really important to reading comprehension, we'd spend more time than maybe was happening in class with these kids, teaching them more and more of that, so that if we taught it beforehand, they'd perform better in class. If we taught it after they had trouble in class, they get another hit of it. All right. Now, while we felt like that was a good way to go, and it's not a bad thing to do, and if I don't want to tell anyone here that if that's what you're doing the wrong thing, because there are plenty of schools whose practices, instructional practices, I really rate highly, who do that kind of work. And I think it's a good way to do it. The issue with for us, was that one. So it was a bit tricky for us to kind of know, are we improving these kids' reading comprehension here, or are we improving their knowledge base, or what is it that we're actually maybe improving? That's difficult. And then we got this as well. And even though we felt like our students would actually, they'd get better scores in sort of like a post-test in of a core knowledge type unit, a read to learn unit, and they would show better comprehension within intervention lessons. When it came to our testing that we would do twice a year, around sort of times when we were doing reporting and things, that proficient reading score just seemed to not shift for a lot of those kids. Now, in one sense, you have to be careful not to jump at that, because it might mean that that particular test is maybe assessing a lot more than just reading comprehension. And that's one of the issues with doing reading comprehension assessments. But we just found that it was a little bit of a pervasive thing with a set of kids. And again, with a set of kids who could decode really accurately and were fluent enough that that the fluency side of things wouldn't be a massive impost on their reading comprehension skills. All right. So we also ended up with this issue that as we went from sort of 4 EFT to less, we really couldn't do as much of that preloading with kids. So it became something that was difficult for us to actually achieve. So then we finally get, half an hour into the presentation, apologies, finally get into, okay, what did we actually do? All right. We did this. So comprehension strategies, which sometimes get a bit of a bad rap, and that might be because of how schools maybe historically have done it, and we'll talk about that in a bit. But it's comprehension strategies bit by bit with review, but maybe different from how schools have historically done it. Okay, and here's the but. So have a read of that. Give you a few seconds. So we weren't going to do a program where we teach small group of children a comprehension strategy and say, okay, execute it. And then the next one, execute it. The next one, execute it. The goal was actually always, we've got a text in front of us. And your goal is that you will understand the text. You'll show us your understanding of the text. And we will continually ask you, so what's going on, recapping, making sure that the students are really clear in telling us what's happening, and then us responding if something's not clear. Okay. So as it says there, we are trying to use these comprehension strategies, not just for the sake of executing strategy, but to actually help students use those strategies to actually understand the text. Okay. And there was a really heavy focus on this. So using these strategies, not just within one session, but then also as we build on and on and on and teach more strategies, coming back to strategies that we've already asked kids to try and execute, and redoing them. So by the end of this short-term comprehension intervention, that we're trying to show kids, if they can actually juggle quite a few strategies at appropriate times, that's going to actually help them understand the text. So this is important. So you can find products around that will have 50, 60 reading comprehension strategies. I'd argue there's not actually that many, and a lot of them are describing something that's so similar that they pretty much are the same, and they do have a big overlap. Okay, so what I'm trying to do here is talk about sort of two broad types. So you have the ones that are sort of metacognitive. So that idea of creating a mental model, maintaining comprehension. Just one note on creating a mental model: it doesn't necessarily mean the same thing as visualizing. Some kids can't visualize, but they can still create sort of a mental model of what's happening in the text. That's just an important thing. And I was just having a chat to Talika yesterday about this, and funnily enough, a lot of the kids that she's now working with this stuff actually say they're not fantastic at sort of creating a detailed picture in their head. Now that's likely to be an effect, not necessarily a cause of reading comprehension, but it's an interesting thing. So I guess what they're saying is, I'm actually having trouble with creating the mental model here. And then you get these ones. These are things that you can actually do. So you can create a mental model, but it's sort of something that's a bit more of an effect. But these are the things you can actually do actively. I know that you'll be reading through this off the slide here, so I'm not going to read it off for you, but I will just quickly explain anaphoric and cataphoric reference. So anaphoric reference is where I might say, Shane is at work. He is in a quiet room. So he is referring, it's a reference to Shane. And Shane was said, and then there was a reference after it. Or I could go the other way, which is cataphoric reference, and say, he is at work. Shane is in a quiet room. So Shane is referred to as he before we actually know who Shane is. All right, so we can go both ways. And we can teach kids how anaphoric and cataphoric reference works. And I tell you what, that one, hardly anyone talks about it. And I'd almost argue that once kids get that, it is incredible how much of a difference something like that can make. And at the end of today, we will go through an example of that. And then I'm going to do another session for Ballarat into term 4, where we give examples of more and more of these sort of task-based comprehension strategies. So the key here is that we don't want to just teach these to the kids. We want to teach them and then embed them. And it's not less is more. It's around about 6. 6 is about right. Once you've taught this for sort of 6 sessions, it's probably as good as teaching it for tons of sessions, which is a good thing to know. Now, I'm not saying that that's the magic number, but it's a nice rule of thumb. And that Dan Willingham text talks about that. And that idea of teaching and then embedding the strategy is really important, and was talked quite a lot about in that roundtable podcast I mentioned earlier. Okay, so I'll go back one step. I just want to make it clear. So the strategies are supposed to be in support of understanding the text and not the other way around. They're not something that we are practicing for the sake of it. We're practicing them because they're going to help us understand the text, and that is where the schools have often gone the other way, where they've made the strategy the key of a lesson, and it doesn't actually matter whether the child has understood the text or not, it's as long as they showed that they executed the strategy. But that's pointless unless it's helping understand the text in front of you. So this is really important. I've said this a couple of times. Whenever you're doing reading comprehension strategies, whether it's in class or in small group intervention, one-on-one intervention, these strategies should be trying to serve comprehension of whatever it is you're doing. So schools have often done this, and we say no, that's not what we've done here in this intervention. It's more this. So the goal being, I will show my understanding of the text, and there's sort of like a success criteria here of saying, well, I'll actually execute that strategy because it will help me get to the goal of understanding the text. And even better is this, okay? So, yep, the primary goal is I'll understand the text, but why am I doing that? So there's a sort of secondary goal. I'm doing it because it's going to help me understand that text, but it's also going to help me understand a whole lot of other texts as well. So yeah, that's really important. And this book, again, it sort of shies away a little bit from from using reading comprehension strategies as such, really explicitly. But when you read through and listen to the authors talk about it, they're actually they're sort of I guess using some of the strategies from at least from what I understand when they talk. They're using some of those strategies, but just sort of not necessarily explicitly. There is a lot of strategic talking about what's happening in the text. So again, using those strategies in conjunction with this text, I think, is a really good way to go. So this is what our intervention looked like. So initially we had two small groups, a 1 to 3 and a 1 to 2. And we started with Year 5 boys. And these kids, they were the ones that, they had adequate speed in their reading. So their reading rate was good, or good enough to support comprehension. Their prosody was maybe a touch off, and that might have been because they were having trouble understanding the text. And this was very much what we saw with these boys, that they sort of reading was a real drag because it was so hard they didn't really get much from it. They weren't understanding things all that much. So we had this completed by Talika. And then after doing this first group with the boys from Year 5, Talika also has trialled this with some younger grades as well. And this is sort of what it looked like. Okay, nice, boring looking Excel spreadsheet, but I'll just quickly take you through them. These are the things that we did over time, remembering that once we got one of these strategies sort of down pat, we would continue to talk about it in other lessons. So there was a sort of a spiraling effect going on, a little bit of sort of review, but within the context of reading passages. So we started off with literal comprehension of sentences, just sentences, making sure that kids knew where to find in pretty basic, simple sentence what the who, what, where, when, why, and how was. Okay. And then continuing that into multi-sentences. So making sure we took, little text that had 3 or 4 sentences and get kids to analyze the who, what, where, when, why, how of each of those sentences. Once we finished that, we went on to what's called sort of cohesive devices. So that's when we're talking about that anaphoric and cataphoric reference, teaching kids that one sentence will say something, the next sentence will have a reference point to that sentence from before, likely. You need to make sure that you aren't reading that next sentence as a totally separate sentence. It actually links to the first. Okay. Really quick example of this is when I was working with a boy yonks ago who read a sentence about 2 men swam by the side of a ship. Oh, sorry, 2, not 2 men. 2 dolphins swam by the side of the ship. Full stop. They jumped out of the water as the ship came near them. And I asked the boy, who's they in that second sentence? And the boy said, it's 2 men. So that was a child who couldn't follow the reference. And as soon as we pointed it out to him, he said, oh, it's the same dolphins from the first sentence. Yes, it is. All right. So that's what that cohesive device is about. Then we go into the strategies of like maintaining comprehension. So making sure that we are actually purposefully saying, yes, I am maintaining what I'm reading, and I'm making sure that I'm sort of doing like a summation of each sentence by sentence, to make sure that I'm keeping my comprehension here. And then within that, talking about, okay, well, what might be coming next? What might be coming next? Which is that predicting side of things. The questioning was sort of throughout a lot, so that's where we were asking questions of the kids, and then within that, we were bringing in questioning and predicting, and then also doing some summarizing work as well. We did 3 lessons on making inferences. So inferring is not a skill that lives by itself, but teaching kids to be aware that there might be inferences, and explaining how those inferences might work in certain situations is important. A lot of our kids tend not to actually think about that. And then those last 4 lessons, we're putting it all together. So taking all those strategies that we had done and trying to get them all into one lesson. So what we did is just got lots and lots of texts that we could use. So we had all the things we wanted to do, the skill focus we wanted for each lesson, text that went next to them. We started writing in vocab words that we wanted to focus on. You'll see that that's blank, because after the first 10 sessions, we realized we were actually talking about these words and more as we were trying to get the kids comprehending the text. So we actually said, you know what, we're going to spend less time on specifically doing one word, and we're going to try and get them understanding what that word might mean in context of the passage. So it became a lesser focus, which might sound a bit odd, knowing though that they're also getting that vocab work in class as well. The other thing that was important for us is to go, okay, well, what's the actual goal we're trying to achieve here? So we wrote down, well, what is it that we want kids to do? So, for instance, when you look down there at making inferences, this is what we wanted the kids to do. We wanted them to be able to answer inferential questions and also justify the answers. So it's not just a question answer type thing. It's like, okay, tell me why that is the answer to that, to make sure that we could see their understanding. And this was the process that we use for each skill focus. So this is all in an Excel spreadsheet that I'm more than happy to share with you. Unfortunately, we can't share the actual resources because they're all photocopied, etc., from copyright books. But you'll get the idea as to what we're trying to do from this Excel spreadsheet. The other thing that we did is at the end of every session, we would actually, so we were trying to get our text to increase over time. But at the end of each session, we would actually have a period of time where we would model to the children as many of those strategies on the left-hand side. So we would essentially do all of the dialogic type teaching and say, okay, this is how I am getting to the comprehension of this assessment. So we're making our thinking clear to the kids, showing them how strategic we were as comprehenders of written text, so that they got a model of what it's going to look like at the back end in that putting it all together, but from the start. Okay, so they were doing those activities at the start of the lesson. Then at the end, we're modeling sort of comprehension in its totality. And then eventually they will start to take over. So that gradual release type model. So the question is, did this program actually achieve anything? Okay, and this is the answer. Right, because we have to be cautious about, saying, yeah, it was fantastic, it worked. We're going to tell you that it worked, but it's not a research study, and we're obviously highly biased because we love working with the kids at Brandon Park, and we hope that they improve. But I'll try and give you an example of how we tracked some of that improvement. So the kids before, they were kids who were plateauing in that proficient reading at easy CVM, somewhere between 18 months to 3 to 4 years behind. Excuse me. And these are kids who just weren't getting the comprehension. So they read the text quickly enough, not getting it. Okay. I said, these are the kids after doing this short-term intervention. And yeah, be kind, because this is not a study, again. However, these are the results we got from that first trial. So we had every child improve at least 12 months on that proficient reading assessment. So we're talking 25 lessons, less than a term of work, and they improved 12 months on our on that assessment. Teachers were surprised. We were surprised too, to a certain extent. I often think we're not going to actually achieve much, but this one seemed to do a good job. I say at least 12 months. There are some kids that jumped by sort of, a couple of years. Now, I'm not saying that their comprehension jumped by 12 months or overall, but their ability to get their way through a text and comprehend it enough to get a better score on that, that's essentially what we're saying improved there. All right. Now, 6 months later, we're able to check again, 2 out of 7 of the students actually then continued to score higher again, and 5 out of the 7 students continued to score the same again. So the results were fairly stable. They didn't drop. And probably the thing that we did really like seeing is that these kids who are disengaged comprehenders, they started that way and eventually got to the point at the end of it where they're like, yeah, I kind of get this, actually get it. Now, here are some student anecdotes. This is the lowest form of evidence you can possibly get, so take this with a grain of salt. But we thought it's important to mention this. This is what one kid said to us. Right? No one has taught me how to understand it before. It's like, goodness, okay, that's a good wake-up call for us as a school. Frightening, but good, because it's like, all right, what we've done here, this particular kid has thought that it's improved his comprehension ability. We got this as well. Like, oh, I get it now. So like, I wasn't comprehending before, I get it now. And weirdly got this quite a lot. This is so fun, all right? We didn't think it'd be fun at all. We thought it'd be fairly stock standard, kind of boring, but a lot of the kids actually found it really good. I think it's probably because they were, finding that they were being successful. Now, that early success, after now doing this a few times, 5 more groups of students, this time, some kids all the way back to year 3 and 5, and the students here are the same deal. So the kids who've got good, decent fluency sort of scores, so good rate in reading, but proficient reading scores just continue to plateau. And again, be kind, because it's not a study. But we've had a very similar kind of result. So we've had children improve at least 12 months on proficient reading. We've had some schools that have been at level. The average student went up within that test 1.5, thinking about progression point type stuff, went up 1.5, or around about 1.5 years on that particular test. So again, these are, we want to be cautious about these results. But what it is showing is that these kids, again, are getting through a text better and are able to comprehend it better, so that when they are asked comprehension type questions, they're able to get through, work their way through the text better to actually answer these. Combine that with, I guess, what the kids have said, and we're like, okay, we're at least onto something here. It's doing something. It's achieving something we haven't achieved before. All right. So these, I'm more than happy to share the slides for today. These 5 areas are really worth reading if you haven't already in this sort of with this sort of work. Pretty much most of the ones we've talked about today, but also explicit direct instruction, just to help. It just helps us to keep the pace up of these lessons, etc. So all those in student engagement norms and things are being used within there. Last thing I wanted to do is just take you through really quickly. I'm aware that I haven't got much time left. Just to give you a flavour of what the next time will be like, to show you. Want to explain to you, how complex some of these texts are to actually comprehend. How much we take for granted that we can just read it and we know what's going on. But if the more that you're aware of what's happening sort of under the hood, comprehension-wise, with the text, the easier it is that you're going to be able to actually help kids with it. So this is a text that we've done with our students. I'll just read it sentence by sentence, and we'll talk about the reference that's going on in each sentence. So what refers to what. So we've got the first sentence here. We were walking home along the riverbank. So we'd stop there and say to the kids, okay, what are you thinking is going on here? Making sure that kids understand what a riverbank is, but also just making sure that it says that they know. It says we. So we don't actually know who it is yet, but we know that there's at least 2 characters already. And then it says each day all sorts of people used the path. Okay. And we need to make sure that the kids understand that the path is the thing that's right beside the riverbank. Because if we don't make that connection, we're not going to understand what's going to happen after this. So that's one of those reference points. The path is referring back to next to the riverbank. Then we've got the next sentence. There were joggers and dog walkers. So it says there were joggers and dog walkers. If you just take that out of context, okay, great. There were joggers. What does that actually mean? So we would ask our kids after training them, what does it mean there were joggers and dog walkers? What are we talking about here? We want the kids to go, that's right. It's the people. And it's the people who use the path. Yes. So they're saying there's this path next to the riverbank, and people use the path. The people who use them are joggers and dog walkers. Yeah, good. All right, we've got the right kind of idea now. And then it says there were bike riders and skateboarders. It's just more people. Okay. There were people who just like getting out in the sunshine. By then, the kids go, okay. So they're just talking about all the people who use this path that's next to the riverbank. And then it says there was plenty of room for everyone. Like, what does that mean? Yes, plenty of room on the path. See how it doesn't say plenty of room on the path. We need to know what that means. So getting kids to make sure that they understand. And if they don't understand, us helping them to work out where that reference goes, and be able to then tell us back what it means. All right, as we continue, at this time of day, though, we were the only ones on the path. So again, what's we? It's these kids from the very first sentence. All right, and the path, it's that path. And where's that path again, guys? Yes, it's next to the riverbank. So see how complex this is comprehension-wise if I'm not making the connections from sentence to sentence, all this reference work. We had been to football practice. Again, who's we? It's those same. It's probably kids now. Right? We've got a little bit more of a mental model perhaps going on. And then it says, now we were on our way home in the last of the daylight. So it says on our way home. On our way home from what? All right. Excuse me. On our way home from football practice. Right. And it says it's the last of the daylight. And that's referring back to this at this time of day. So we go, okay, what time of day were they walking home? They were walking home and it's getting dark. Okay, cool. All right. And continue on. We weren't in a hurry. We were a bit tired after the practice. And what's the practice? It's the football practice. So see how all these references are happening, and we in our brains just make those references. I'll just make a couple more and then we'll finish up. So we've got here, Kirk spotted something lying in the grass beside the path. If I don't make that connection that Kirk is one of the we at the start, then that's just adding another character in. But we need to understand that refers back to we. Okay, so that's, you say, okay, we know that Kirk is a character, and that's part of we. We don't know what else yet. So he spotted something lying in the grass beside the path. It was a man's wallet with a lot of money in it. What on earth does it mean? Well, it is this thing, the thing that he saw lying in the grass. So this is how these sentences, again, are referring back to each other. And then it says, there were also some cards and a driver's license with a photo on it. What does that mean, there were? And that's that same thing that we were talking about from the first paragraph, there were. Okay, so the there were is talking about what's in that wallet. And then we put it in Jimmy's bag and kept on walking. Who on earth is Jimmy? It's one of those people from we. Okay, so we now know that we've got Kirk, we've got Jimmy, but then talking about the fact that it says we, there's obviously another person, the person who's actually the first person narrative here. Like, there's another person here that we don't know, hasn't been named. Okay, and then it says we kept on walking. What does that mean? Well, we kept on walking up the path. Okay, so I'll end it there, but that gives you an idea as to how complex something that looks fairly simple is, and we need to make those connections in this part of the comprehension intervention we're doing with the kids. We're showing them how to use reference to help them understand what is going on. So there's a strategy happening, but it's in service of actually trying to comprehend the text. So instead of it just being comprehension strategy in service of the text, which is what that roundtable podcast talks about a lot. Okay. Thanks very much for coming along. I've said Q&A, and I've, in true Shane style, have spoken for too long already. But I am more than happy to stick around to answer any questions if people have them. And I'll have a quick look at the chat as well to see if there's anything else that I might have not answered it during. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Shane. There was so many great things that you spoke about then, and I think what always stands out to me when I listen to you talk is the way you can take what are really complex problems of practice for schools and teachers that we grapple with all the time and articulate them or distill them into practical steps. Because going from research to practice in the classroom is a really challenging thing. Sue has actually messaged me and said you've just ticked off one of the things in her AIP at Ararat West. So that's always a win as well when we get to that really practical stage of school improvement with schools as well. The small manageable chunks that you break things down into is terrific. I loved hearing, I love hearing that this is so fun, but my favourite is the I get it now. One of those things as teachers that we all love to hear is I get it now. And really getting us to understand the complexity of sentence to sentence connections. So I'm looking forward to our next session on that. I did have a question. I think there'll be some in the chat as well. How long were the sessions?
Yeah, so I realised as I was talking that I was struggling to make the time, so I didn't call on Talika. I'm not actually sure if she's here at the moment, but if she is, please do take yourself off mute and you can help answer this one, Talika. But
Great.
Brandon Park runs 50-minute lessons.
Okay.
So the easiest thing we find is to just work within the confines of that 50 minutes. Obviously, by the time you go and grab kids, it ends up being about 45 minutes. So it's those 25 lessons, times by about 40 to 45, something like that.
All right, thank you. Can you see some of those questions in the chat?
Yeah, I can. Yep. So there was a question about where would you sort of find sort of similar type passages and things, because it is, we often talk talk about novel studies, and straight away we're talking about here where that text we saw, comprehension could be done in the third sentence. So you need short, sharp, like short story type stuff. When I'm more than happy to share out that the Excel spreadsheet, and that'll give you some of the titles that we've used. Some, like that thing that you saw, was just a very dodgy photocopy of something called keys into reorganization, I think it is. So it's actually from the same people that make the probe test. We've also used a lot of things from a program called Visualizing and Verbalizing, just because I really like their texts, and they are written so that you have to really, you have to do some mental gymnastics to fully comprehend what's going on with those texts. So, those are a couple of places that we've taken from. And does Easy CBM have progress monitoring tools like Dibbles? Yeah, it's extremely similar, especially on the fluency side of things. It actually, probably the biggest difference is what I talked about today, the proficient reading, is sort of more a more regular style. Kids read a text and then answer comprehension questions, unlike Dibbles, which more has the 3-minute maze.
Great. Well, thank you so much. If there aren't any more questions at this stage, we might need to wrap it up now. I know the podcast I'll be listening to on my drive home tonight, so thank you for that tip too. Always good. And we will sort out what date the next session will be on, which we think it'll be early term 4, and then I'm sure Kathleen will post it to Read Ballarat. So make sure you keep checking the updates there.
And I'll try and make sure Talika is more involved, and she can take us through a couple of things she does, because she's actually the one, as I said, that does the work with the kids.
Oh, that'd be great to hear from her too. Yeah, that'd be wonderful.
Yep.
Awesome.
No
All
worries.
right. Thanks, Shane. We'll see you soon.